Today I have a daughter-in-law, Peggy, a grandson, Mark, and a granddaughter, Linda. Thank you so much for coming out. We did have an exciting evening last night. Anybody watch TV last night at all? Well, it was great. It's pretty amazing how sometimes if you're in second place, they talk about the first and the third place. But last night it was a little bit different. They had a little harder time avoiding the real conversation. And like I said last night, Romney did have a victory, but we had something very, very special. We had a victory for something very important in this country. We had a victory for the cause of liberty last night. And that is so different, and that is also the reason the crowds are different. The enthusiasm is different. Somebody told me, I wasn't there, so I can't verify it, but they said, the governors, had a good crowd out, and they had a lot of enthusiasm. But he left, and everybody else left. Well, 2 to 3 hours later, we had people there still, having a real good time and celebrating. There's just so much enthusiasm. It keeps growing. It was mentioned by Mike about 4 years ago. We were much smaller in numbers, and I always talk about, the tireless, irate minority that leads the charge. But we're not so small. We're not so much a minority. We're marching on. The numbers are growing. They grew exponentially in New Hampshire, and they're going to grow continuously here in South Carolina as well. This morning they cited a poll, and of course they can cite one poll or they can make a poll up. Sometimes they try to move elections by polling. Of course, the poll they cited was I was not at the top here in South Carolina. I said, yes, but you haven't done a poll since last night, so we're on the move, and it isn't only because you have a candidate, but we have an issue. We have a set of principles that we are going to defend, and this is what motivates people. It motivates every one of us because we're doing it for a very special person. It's not just tomorrow or the next week. What we want to do is reverse the trend of this country for not only a few years or a few elections. It's a reversal of probably 100 years of slipping and sliding away from our Constitution. But the great thing is we need something different, but we don't need anything brand new. What we need to go and find out what we were told to do to run this country. And they wrote a little document called the Constitution. So this message is resonating now, and it's necessary. A lot of times I'm asked, they say, how come it's different now than 4 years ago? Well, the country is different, and the world is different, and they're starting to wake up, and they're starting to realize those things that we had talked about for so long, and you were so much aware of, that we had a messy financial system, a messy banking system, and that we had these bubbles forming. Now everybody knows about it. But I think the two most important things over and above the whole issue of liberty and, our Constitution is the fact that this campaign in the last year especially, even though it's been going on for a lot longer, we have had two issues brought to the forefront, which we cannot ignore. We must deal with if we want to get things back in order, get the budget balanced, and get a good economic system. The one issue, of course, is a different foreign policy. We don't need to drain our resources overseas, and we need to talk. We need to talk about the foreign policy of the Founding Fathers and the foreign policy that's permissive under the Constitution. That is non-intervention, mind our own business, and have a strong national defense. Unfortunately, we've had some in the Republican Party who thinks that if you spend less money on child health care, that might be conservative. But if you spend less money overseas, that's conservative. If you spend more, it's supposed to be conservative. Why isn't being conservative spending less money every place? I'll tell you one reason why they get worried. They get worried about national defense, which I'm worried about too. I had a little bit of experience. I spent a few years in the military in a tough time at the peak of the Cold War. So there is reason to be concerned on how you cut. The magnificent thing about cutting the military expenditures carelessly overseas, invading countries we don't need to invade, sending foreign aid to countries that don't deserve it and we don't have a right to send it. What it does is gives us a stronger national defense, not a weaker national defense. But they still will challenge and say, well, if you don't vote continuously to go to war and continuously for all these budgets, no matter what, don't distinguish between defense and just military occupation. But guess what? You probably have heard which candidate gets the most money from the active military duty people, and that is our campaign. So it's obvious that being a constitutionalist and a conservative and not wanting to waste money overseas, that the Constitution is very, very explicit. That is a federal function. It's not a state function. It's a federal function to have a strong national defense. And it can be done and not shortchanges this country in any way whatsoever. But if we continue what we're doing in foreign policy, which literally in the last 10 years of these wars, we have expanded our national debt by $4 trillion. Now, what is the solution to this? Are we going to get wise people in Washington all of a sudden say, well, let's go in this country, but not this country. Let's do this and let's bomb this country. No, what we need to do is say that once again, this country should never go to war unless the war is declared, win it, and come home. Now there is one other issue that I've talked about, and you might not have heard about it at all, but I want to make sure you know that another big issue for this campaign has to do with the monetary system, having to do with looking at the Federal Reserve and auditing the Federal Reserve and doing something about it. There you go. And Mike, when he introduced me, he said that we were all, because when they call me dangerous, they're calling you dangerous too. Just remember that. So yes, the Federal Reserve considers us a danger because we're going to break up their monopoly and all their bailouts of their friends on Wall Street and all the things that they do. But sticking to the philosophy and why the Federal Reserve and a central bank, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. A few of them there probably are not. They're probably well motivated. They're just very confused on economics. But with the whole idea that when you run out of the ability to tax the people because they'll go broke and they'll resent it, and you run out of the ability to borrow money because interest rates will go up, countries do this. All the countries of the world are doing this now. They think they can continue to just print currencies forever and create wealth. And all it does is literally destroys wealth. It not only eventually destroys the wealth because it destroys the currency, in the meantime, it does serve special interests. The destruction of a currency undermines the middle class, and the wealth of the middle class goes to the wealthy. And, of course, they get control of the government. And then when the bailouts come and the monetary system works, guess who gets bailed out? The people who had been making all the money when the financial bubbles were being formed. What happens to the middle class? Not only does the middle class shrink, they become poorer, they lose their jobs, and they lose their houses. And then we end up with an educational system where we graduate maybe more people, but they can't get jobs and they owe $1 trillion. This dependency on the federal government to take care of us from cradle to grave, whether it's education or medical care or whatever, it doesn't work. And I think the people realize it. This is probably the significant thing that has happened here in the last 4 years. It's been happening gradually all along as the interest has grown on the freedom message. But in the last 4 years, it is dramatic. The financial crisis has hit. The people now, by a large majority, not only are the military tired of all these wars, but the people are waking up and they realize not only is it harmful to so many families on what happens by sending troops back and forth and back and forth, but also financially, how it contributes to an economic crisis. Because when you think of all that money that is spent overseas, they say, well, what would happen if you just quit spending it? Wouldn't that hurt the economy? No, that money would go to the people, and the people would get to spend the money. But very, very obviously, the issue that's on the minds of most Americans and the people I've talked to, it boils down when they look at it just in a superficial way of what they're most concerned about. It is the economy and jobs and inflation and the future of our economy. So even those who have jobs and seem to be doing well, they also know that there are some serious problems and they're not overconfident. But, oh, this will clear up. This is a mild recession. It'll be over in a little bit of time, like the government tells us. But no, it's 4 years now. There's no signs that it's really ending. The world is engulfed in a financial crisis, and all they're doing is printing all the currencies. But they're still depending on you and your dollar. They're saying that ultimately the dollar has to bail out everybody, and they've been doing it. Right now, we have made promises to Europe. The banks are on the ropes because they have bought up debt in Spain and Italy and also in Greece. And we, in a way, are backing that up because our banks have branches over in Europe, and nobody wants the banks of Europe and our banks to go under, and they've and not only are involved in buying the debt, they get involved in this derivatives market, and they say, well, if we don't bail them out, they'll all go bankrupt. Well, that's what they should do. They should all go bankrupt. But this is the wonderful thing about the free market and sound money. If you want to clean up the mess and have jobs again, you have to say, well, how did we get into this mess? We had too much government intervention. We had too much spending, too much debt, too much printing press money, and too much interference with regulations. So if we got into that mess systematically and consistently over decades, we have to stop it. But the real financial bubble that we're working in trying to resolve right now started in 1971. That is when they were the last link of our dollar to anything sound like gold. It was removed, which gave license to the big spenders across the political spectrum. And they were always compromising. They said, we need more compromise in Washington. We don't need more compromise of all these people spending our money. But what we do need to do is bring people together, people of different political persuasions, people of different political parties, people who have different personal habits, people who would like to spend their money differently. Because the whole group, all of us can be brought together with the understanding of what freedom is all about. And this... I saw a little clip yesterday of a young lady talking about this, and she was talking about the politics of it all, but she was also talking about it sociologically, and that was that, yes, freedom is a great thing to deliver politically and get people motivated, and let's hope to really influence the Republican Party because they give a lot of good rhetoric about freedom and individual liberty, but make them stick to it. But she was indicating that it's a social thing too, that not only is it political, because it minimizes the political activity. It shrinks government. It shrinks the government involvement in our lives and spending our money, regulating the economy. And then all of a sudden it brings people together. So everybody has a self-interest for different reasons. The self-interest is, leave me alone. Let me take care of myself.